You find yourself transported forward through time, landing in the Persian Empire circa 500 BCE, where you're standing in the magnificent audience hall of Persepolis as dawn light filters through the columns like golden honey. The scale is breathtaking. This isn't just a palace, it's a statement written in stone that says we own everything from India to Greece, and we have the architectural receipts to prove it. The air smells of cedar wood, frankincense, and the particular aroma of imperial confidence that comes from ruling over 23 different nations, each with their own languages, gods, and deeply held opinions about proper tax collection methods. Remember those Mesopotamian city-states you walked through earlier? They're now just one small part of an empire so vast that it takes months for messages to travel from one end to the other. The Persians, to their credit, figured out something that their predecessors had missed. Instead of constantly fighting to suppress every conquered people's culture, why not just let them keep their traditions while they pay taxes to you? It's like being the world's first cultural diversity consultant, except with significantly more emphasis on tribute collection. You watch as delegations from across the known world file into the hall, each group wearing their traditional costumes and carrying gifts that represent their homeland's finest offerings. There are Egyptians with gold and exotic animals, Indians with spices and precious stones, Greeks with olive oil and barely concealed resentment. It's essentially the world's first United Nations Assembly, if the UN had been run by absolute monarchs who settled disputes with armies instead of strongly worded resolutions. Here's your major historical fact for this era. The Persian Empire created the world's first international postal system, complete with relay stations every 25 miles and fresh horses ready to carry messages across thousands of miles of territory. Think of it as ancient email, except significantly more reliable than your current internet service provider and with a much lower chance of your important messages ending up in a spam folder guarded by suspicious camels. The Persian approach to governance was remarkably sophisticated for its time. They established satrapies, provinces, with local governors who maintained order while respecting local customs. But here's where human nature inevitably complicated this elegant system. Some satraps decided that being a provincial governor wasn't quite satisfying enough and began entertaining thoughts about independence. It's the eternal middle management dilemma, except with consequences measured in cavalry charges rather than performance reviews. You stroll through the palace gardens, where peacocks strut between carefully maintained flower beds and fountains provide a cooling soundtrack to the morning heat. Here you encounter an obscure cultural detail that perfectly captures the Persian mindset. They were obsessed with truth-telling. Their moral philosophy, Zoroastrianism, emphasized the cosmic battle between truth and lies, light and darkness. Ironically, This empire built on truth-telling spent considerable energy managing the creative interpretations of reality that various subject peoples insisted on maintaining about their tax obligations and military service requirements. The afternoon finds you in the palace library, watching scribes copy documents in multiple languages, Old Persian, Elamite, Babylonian, because ruling a multicultural empire requires truly impressive translation skills. Historians still debate whether the Persian system of cultural tolerance was genuine enlightenment or simply pragmatic administration, but watching these scribes work, you suspect it was probably both, with a healthy dose of whatever keeps the tax revenue flowing thrown in for good measure. As evening approaches, you witness something that encapsulates the entire Middle Eastern experience: a delegation of Greek ambassadors meeting with Persian officials to discuss territorial disputes in Asia Minor. Both sides are perfectly polite, diplomatically sophisticated, and absolutely convinced that their position is not only correct but blessed by divine authority. The Greeks believe their city-state independence is sacred. The Persians believe their imperial unity brings peace and prosperity. Neither side is entirely wrong, which makes the conflict entirely inevitable. You notice the Persian officials treating this negotiation with the weary patience of people who have had this exact conversation with dozens of different ethnic groups over the past century. It's like watching customer service representatives dealing with complaints about a product that works perfectly fine but that customers insist on using in ways it wasn't designed for. The product is empire. The complaint is about freedom. The solution remains frustratingly elusive. The palace walls are decorated with reliefs showing the king receiving tribute from representatives of all nations, each figure carved with careful attention to authentic dress and features. It's a celebration of diversity, but also a not-so-subtle reminder of who's in charge. You realize you're looking at ancient propaganda that's surprisingly sophisticated. It acknowledges different cultures while making clear that they all ultimately serve the same master. As night falls over Persepolis, you observe something that will become a recurring theme in Middle Eastern history: the tension between unity and independence, between imperial peace and local autonomy, between the efficiency of central control and the human desire for self-determination. The Persian Empire solved many problems that had plagued the region for centuries, but it also created new ones that would outlast the empire itself. You stand on a balcony overlooking the capital, watching torchlights flicker like stars across the vast complex below. The Persian solution to Middle Eastern conflict was elegant in theory: create an empire so large and well administered that fighting becomes impractical, and allow enough cultural freedom that rebellion becomes unnecessary. For 2 centuries, it actually worked reasonably well. But empires, like all human institutions, eventually succumb to the same forces they were designed to control: ambition, religious differences, resource competition, and the eternal human conviction that surely we could run things better if we were in charge. The irony settles over you like the cool night air. The Persians created the template for every subsequent attempt to bring lasting peace to the Middle East through imperial unity. Romans would try it, Arabs would try it, Ottomans would try it, and each would achieve temporary success before discovering that the region's fundamental challenges, diverse peoples, limited resources, strategic geography, and deeply held beliefs about how society should be organized, are more persistent than any empire, no matter how enlightened or powerful. As our journey through 3 millennia of Middle Eastern history draws to a close, you find yourself standing once again in that dusty Mesopotamian courtyard where we began. But now the evening shadows stretch longer, and the air carries the weight of all the centuries you've witnessed. The servants are still scurrying past with their bronze weapons, the merchants are still arguing over prices, and somewhere in the distance, someone is still making plans that will inevitably lead to the next conflict, the next empire, the next attempt to solve the eternal puzzle of how different peoples can share the same land. You understand now that what you've witnessed isn't really about warfare at all. It's about the profound human challenge of living together despite our differences, magnified by geography that makes this region impossible to ignore and blessed with resources that make it impossible to abandon. The Middle East sits at the crossroads of continents, the bridge between civilizations, the corridor through which ideas, goods, and armies have flowed for thousands of years. It's simultaneously everyone's pathway and no one's permanent home, everyone's prize, and no one's to keep forever. The patterns you've observed, the rise and fall of empires, the clash between unity and independence, the tension between religious truth and political pragmatism, these aren't unique to any one culture or era. They're the recurring themes of human civilization itself, played out on a stage where the audience includes the entire known world and the reviews are written in the chronicles of conquering armies. Each generation believes it has found the solution, the final answer to the region's eternal questions, only to discover that the questions themselves are more enduring than any answers. Perhaps that's the most profound realization of all, that this isn't a problem to be solved but a condition to be understood. Not a puzzle with a missing piece but a complex system where every solution creates new challenges, where every piece contains the seeds of the next conflict, and where the very forces that make the region so important, its location, its resources, its role as humanity's crossroads, also make lasting tranquility nearly impossible. As you prepare to return to your own time, carrying with you the long perspective of centuries, remember that the people you've met along this journey, the Sumerian merchants, the Persian diplomats, the countless ordinary individuals trying to live their lives amid the grand sweep of history, they all faced the same fundamental challenges we face today. How to balance competing interests, how to respect differences while maintaining unity, how to honor the past while adapting to the future, and How to find peace not through the absence of conflict but through the wisdom to manage it constructively. The story continues, as it always has, as it always will, in the eternal theater of the Middle East, where the plays change but the themes remain constant, and where understanding the past becomes not a key to prediction but a source of patience, compassion, and perhaps, eventually, wisdom. You wake before dawn in the same city, but now it's 1430 CE, and something has changed in the air itself, a subtle tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm when even the birds fall silent. You walk the same stone pathways you explored yesterday, but now you notice things that weren't there before, or perhaps you simply weren't looking carefully enough. Cracks in the masonry that speak of delayed maintenance, canals where the water level seems lower than it should be, and a certain weariness in the faces of the people you pass that suggests all is not well in paradise. Remember the sophisticated irrigation system you marveled at earlier? This morning you discover that it's become both the city's greatest strength and its most dangerous vulnerability. The network of canals, reservoirs, and dams that allowed Angkor to support over 1 million people also requires constant maintenance, and you're beginning to see signs that the system is under stress. Some channels are clogged with silt, others show evidence of hasty repairs, and the water level in the Great Berets, the massive reservoirs that serve as the city's liquid lifeline, seems to fluctuate in ways that make the engineers look worried. You spend the morning walking through districts that seem somehow less vibrant than they did in our earlier visit. Markets that were once bustling now have empty stalls, and you notice that some of the magnificent residential compounds show signs of abandonment, not dramatic destruction, but the subtle decay that comes when people simply stop caring enough to maintain what their ancestors built. It's like watching a slow-motion tragedy unfold, one cracked roof tile and one overgrown garden at a time. Here's your major historical fact that changes everything you thought you knew about Angkor's decline. Recent archaeological evidence, including analysis of tree rings and sediment cores, reveals that the 14th and 15th centuries brought extreme climate fluctuations to Southeast Asia, including both severe droughts and catastrophic floods that would have devastated the intricate water management systems that kept Angkor functioning. It wasn't invasion or war that brought down this mighty civilization, it was climate change, centuries before humans had ever heard the term. The irony isn't lost on you as you observe teams of workers struggling to repair flood damage to a canal system that was designed to manage water flow with mathematical precision. The very engineering brilliance that made Angkor possible also made it incredibly vulnerable to environmental changes that its builders couldn't have anticipated. It's like building the world's most sophisticated computer and then discovering that someone keeps changing the electrical voltage. Eventually, even the most advanced system will fail under conditions it wasn't designed to handle. You climb to a temple terrace where you can observe the broader patterns of the city's struggle. Here's your obscure cultural detail that reveals the deeper story. The Khmer had developed a complex system of merit-making through temple construction, where kings and nobles gained spiritual credit by building increasingly elaborate religious monuments. By the 15th century, this had created a kind of architectural arms race that was draining resources from practical infrastructure maintenance. It's the medieval equivalent of spending all your money on a luxury car while your house's foundation slowly crumbles. Spiritually impressive, but practically problematic. From your elevated position, you can see evidence of the city's adaptive strategies. New temples being constructed in different architectural styles that require less maintenance, agricultural areas being converted to different types of crops that can better handle unpredictable rainfall, and trade routes being modified to account for changing river levels. The Khmer weren't passively accepting decline. They were actively trying to reinvent their civilization to meet new challenges, which makes their ultimate abandonment of Angkor even more poignant. The afternoon brings news that encapsulates the entire crisis. Raids by Thai forces have disrupted trade routes to the north, while reports from the south describe Portuguese ships exploring the coast, representing new opportunities but also new uncertainties. You're witnessing a civilization caught between environmental stress, military pressure, and the arrival of European colonialism, like being asked to solve a complex puzzle while someone keeps changing the pieces and shaking the table. You spend time in the Royal Palace complex, where the atmosphere has grown notably more subdued. Courtiers speak in hushed tones about consultations with astronomers and priests, seeking spiritual explanations for the practical problems that seem to multiply faster than solutions can be implemented. There's something deeply human about watching powerful people resort to prayer when engineering and administration prove insufficient. It's a response that transcends culture and era. As evening approaches, you witness something that will prove to be historically significant, a royal procession heading south toward what will eventually become Phnom Penh. The king isn't abandoning Angkor permanently, not yet, but he's establishing alternative centers of power that don't depend quite so heavily on the increasingly unreliable water management systems that made the old capital possible. It's strategic adaptation disguised as religious pilgrimage, and it represents the beginning of one of history's most gradual and dignified retreats. The sunset over Angkor that evening carries a different quality than the one you witnessed centuries earlier. There's beauty, certainly, but also a sense of impermanence that seems to settle over the city like evening mist. You realize you're observing not a dramatic collapse but a slow transition, as a civilization that had mastered the art of building permanent monuments discovers that permanence itself might be an illusion. Historians still debate whether the abandonment of Angkor was a catastrophic failure or a successful adaptation to changing circumstances, but walking through the city during these twilight years, you understand that it was probably both, a failure of the old systems and a successful transition to new ones, which is perhaps the most human response possible to impossible circumstances. You notice that even as some areas of the city show signs of decline, others continue to thrive in modified forms. Temples are being converted from Hindu to Buddhist use, residential areas are being redesigned to accommodate different family structures, and the famous water management system is being simplified rather than abandoned entirely. It's like watching a phoenix prepare for rebirth, even as its current form slowly burns away. The night sounds of Angkor in 1430 are subtly different from those you heard in 1150, fewer voices, perhaps, but also a quality of determined adaptation that speaks to the resilience of human communities facing existential challenges. The people you've walked among today aren't giving up, they're transforming, which turns out to be a much more complex and interesting story than simple decline and fall. As our journey through the rise and transformation of Angkor draws to a close, you find yourself standing once more in that temple courtyard where we began, but now the evening light filters through branches and vines that have claimed much of the stonework, creating patterns of shadow and illumination that seem to dance with the memories of all the centuries you've witnessed. The frangipani flowers still bloom among the ruins, their perfume mixing with the earthy scent of jungle reclamation, and somewhere in the distance, the calls of tropical birds echo through chambers that once rang with the chants of priests and the footsteps of pilgrims from across the known world. You understand now that what you've witnessed isn't really a story of loss at all, but rather a profound meditation on the nature of human ambition and adaptation, played out across centuries in stone and water, in the patient accumulation of architectural dreams and the equally patient work of vines in weather and reclaiming what humans had claimed from the forest. The Khmer didn't vanish, they evolved, transforming their civilization from one centered on massive monuments and complex hydraulic engineering to one that could thrive in a changing world, carrying forward the essential elements of their culture while letting go of the structures that no longer serve their needs. The patterns you've observed, the rise of ambitious building projects, the development of sophisticated urban systems, the challenges of environmental change, and the gradual adaptation to new realities, these aren't unique to medieval Cambodia but represent the eternal cycle of human civilizations trying to balance permanence with flexibility, grandeur with sustainability, spiritual aspiration with practical necessity. Each generation builds on the foundations left by their ancestors while adapting to challenges their ancestors never imagined, creating continuity through change rather than through preservation. Perhaps the most profound realization is that the mystery of Angkor's abandonment isn't really mysterious at all when viewed from the long perspective of human adaptation to environmental and social change. The Khmer made the same kinds of practical decisions that communities have always made when faced with circumstances beyond their control. They preserved what was essential, modified what could be adapted, and gracefully released what no longer served their survival and flourishing. The result wasn't tragedy but transformation, Not failure, but a different kind of success that prioritized human welfare over monumental architecture. As you prepare to return to your own time, carrying with you the quiet wisdom of ruins that have learned to dance with the jungle, remember that the true legacy of Angkor isn't found in the stones themselves, but in the demonstration that human creativity and adaptability are more enduring than any monument, that civilizations survive not by resisting change but by embracing it thoughtfully, and that sometimes the most profound success looks like letting go of what we thought we needed in order to preserve what we actually treasure most. The jungle continues its patient work of integration, weaving human achievement into the larger tapestry of natural cycles, creating a new kind of beauty that honors both human ambition and natural resilience, reminding us that all our grandest projects are ultimately collaborations with forces much larger than ourselves, and that true permanence lies not in stone and mortar but in the enduring human capacity to dream, build, adapt, and dream again.